Okay, good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you to the Grand Canyon Historical Society's virtual outing. The speaker tonight is Dr. Tom Myers, and he's going to present his latest book called The Grandest Trek. Tom is a GCHS member. He's also a recipient of the 2025 Pioneer Award. He's an author, explorer, historian, and he is the Grand Canyon clinic physician. The Grand Canyon Historical Society mission statement is that we celebrate and promote the study and preservation of the Grand Canyon region's cultural and natural history for the education and enjoyment of its members and the public. Become a member. The dues are only $35 per year. We're an all-volunteer organization. Please join us so we can continue to expand our many activities like these monthly virtual outings. Very simple to join. You just go to grandcanyonhistory.org and click on join, or if you prefer to donate, there's two boxes at the top of the homepage. Dr. Tom Myers is our speaker. Tom Myers has been a dedicated canyon hiker and river runner for decades. He has worked at the Grand Canyon Clinic as a physician since 1990. Dr. Myers has authored or co-authored 6 Grand Canyon-related publications, including the Outdoor Book Award winners, Over the Edge, Death and Grand Canyon, and Grand Obsession, Harvey Butchart and the Exploration of Grand Canyon, and now the Grandest Trek. He is a recipient of the GCHS Pioneer Award in 2025, and also the Hall of Fame Award in 2015. I give you Dr. Myers.
I got that nice introduction from Tom, our president of the Grand Canyon Historical Society. And, just to let you know that besides being a physician, I consider myself a hopeless Grand Canyon addict and really a nerd of Grand Canyon everything, okay? So if it's got Grand Canyon in it, I'm usually all ears and all eyes. Again, I've worked at the Grand Canyon Clinic since 1990, and I have a special interest in wilderness medicine as well as the human history, especially a history of hikers. And my book is related to that and kind of encapsulates my obsession with the Grand Canyon. I want to start out with some honest pillow talk, just about what my book deals with, and if you are feeling inspired to maybe try something like walking the Grand Canyon from end to end. So, honest pillow talk, it's my author's note. Never underestimate the power of the pillow. For backpacking, a good camping pillow is worth every penny. If you buy a nice little comfy pillow, you'll never regret it. Without one, what you will regret is sleeping in misery, your cheek embedded on a rigid seam of wadded up clothes or a lumpy zipper. Trust me, I've been there. Miserable sleep begats a miserable day. Invest in your sleep, and you will reap dividends. Fail to invest and suffer the consequences. Here's another helpful tip for a good night's sleep. An honest man's pillow is his peace of mind. With that aphorism, I must admit I didn't set out to walk the length of the Grand Canyon in order to join the surprisingly short list of length of the canyon hikers, but it ended up that way. In fact, by the mid-1980s, when I first thought of attempting it, no such list existed. I didn't know if anyone had managed to scramble all of the 600 or so taxing miles from the beginning of Grand Canyon at Lee's Ferry to its end at the Grand Wash Cliffs. And honestly, I hope no one had. Eventually, I learned that I wasn't the only one to have this big idea. Roughly a half dozen others had done it while staying well below the radar. That discovery didn't change a thing. Moreover, when I learned that the newly emerging list included a fine little coterie of dedicated canyon hikers, an eclectic mix of kindred spirits, like-minded brothers and sisters who love the Grand Canyon about as much as anyone can, my determination to be included in that group became even stronger. I'd be lying if I said otherwise. Further truth be told, because of its demands and dangers, hiking the Grand Canyon, especially off-trail, is not for everybody. The canyon can be as brutal as it is beautiful, as indifferent as it is inspiring, and as deadly as it is dramatic. After hiking several thousand miles over 4 decades, working as a physician on the canyon's south rim for more than 3 of those decades, and co-authoring Over the Edge, Death and Grand Canyon, a chronicle of below-the-rim fatalities, I'm well acquainted with the canyon's hazards and their consequences. These hazards have claimed the lives of far too many well-intentioned but poorly prepared hikers. Despite the book's success, it would do my heart good if there were no new names or tragedies to add to future editions of Death in Grand Canyon. More importantly, while the Grandest Trek is an assemblage of stories about people and their experiences, including my own with my son, Weston, hiking the Grand Canyon from end to end, it is not a how-to guide. I hope such a book is never written. There are too many downsides, including the canyon's inherent dangers leading to more deaths, potential crowding, trail scars, and the loss of mystery and the sense of discovery that comes with route finding on your own. Yet I also realize that some with minimal or no canyon backpacking experience may be stirred by these stories to challenge themselves on foot below the rim. Having been in those proverbial hiking boots, I completely understand. But with all sincerity, I say to anyone who decides to heed the canyon siren song, use maximum caution. Potentially negative consequences come with the territory. I've personally suffered my share of trials and tribulations below the rim, including bashed body parts, heat exhaustion, and terrifying moments. I also take no pride in admitting that I've had some very close calls in the canyon, generally as a result of my own lapses in judgment. Frankly, I'm lucky to be here to write that book, and to be here to talk to you today. If nothing else, know this. It is seriously dangerous to hike or backpack remotely or deep into the Grand Canyon. Never do it on a whim. Do your homework, read about where you're going, and come prepared. Avoid the hottest times of the day and year. Bring appropriate food and gear. Carry adequate water, and know how to find more before you run out. Resist scrambling or climbing beyond your skill level or preparedness. And before going off trail, get worn out and dusty on the maintained ones first. Also, hone your ability to read a canyon map and always bring at least one that doesn't require a battery. Above all, appreciate the Grand Canyon can be merciless. It's a bone dry, jagged, and vertical world, as well as a really rocky place. Any backpacking there is going to be hard, so bring a nice pillow. So I just want to say again that, from my experiences at Grand Canyon Clinic and my own adventuring in Grand Canyon, I know about far too many tragedies. And there's an old saying in the emergency medical services world, the EMS world, that there's no new accidents, just new faces. And that's pretty darn true for Grand Canyon. And it would do my heart really well to not add any names to this book, Over the Edge, Death in Grand Canyon. So again, I just plead to those people who are inspired to maybe hike or do something maybe over the top in Grand Canyon to just do your homework first. I want to point out the How Not to Die pocket guide is something I wrote with Grand Canyon Conservancy, being the publisher. It was a great collaboration. With that collaboration, I got to know Susan Tasaki, who was the editor for my book. And one thing I'll say about my book, The Grandest Trek, is that, having Susan on my side as my editor, it really helped to make up for what I think can be mediocrity in writing. Writing for me is a hobby. It's an aside, just as Canyon history is. And I have to work really hard at it. And I feel the other thing that helped make this book what it is the fact that the Canyon gave me some great stories that haven't ever been told. I want you to know that all the proceeds from this book will be donated to the Grand Canyon Conservancy in the name of Robert Eshka Benson. And, for those who don't know Benson, you will if you read this book. He's a guy that was someone in need, emotionally struggled. Part of the reason I want to donate any proceeds to the Conservancy is because they're a philanthropic and collaborative partner with the national park, whose mission is to promote the park champions and to cherish and support the natural and cultural wonder of Grand Canyon. And I think that their efforts have helped in people who seek the canyon out for healing and solace. One thing I will say about Robert, just to give you a sort of a brief overview of who he was born in Germany. He left his native country at age 18 after a dysfunctional life, dysfunctional childhood. His father was a Nazi sympathizer, believed in Aryanism, and unfortunately, Robert was dyslexic and nearsighted, less than perfect Aryan. And his father repeatedly let him know that. When he turned 18, he left Germany to come to the United States, and he never went back to his home country. He found self-worth and solace. I think healing from a lot of the emotional wounds of his childhood in canyon country and hiking. And in the end, he was one of the Grand Canyon's greatest hikers. In 1982, along with another hiker named George Steck, we'll talk about a little bit, he walked the length of the Grand Canyon. But beyond that, he started his hike on July 4th, 1982 in Moab, Utah, way upstream of Grand Canyon National Park. He hiked downstream through that canyon country, through around Lake Powell, the massive convoluted slick rock of Lake Powell before dropping into the canyon. And then he walked all the way to Lake Mead. And then about 6 months later, he turned around and walked back on the opposite side of the river. Unfortunately, in less than a year of that, he killed himself. And I never met him. I wish I had. In many ways, we were kindred. I think, like him, much of my exploration as a young man was a hunt for self-worth, for self-respect, for personal dignity, and for wound healing and an antidote for insecurity. A lot of people seek out wild places for that. Those very reasons. Unfortunately, I think now more than ever, wilderness and wild places are under threat from development, from exploitation. Meanwhile, social media, societal peer pressure from society, um, political and moral unrest, corruption, greed, violence, cruelty, straining the mental health and well-being of our population, especially our youth, like never before. To be able to disconnect from all that, to unplug from that noise and the distractions of a chaotic world, to get oneself in a better headspace, while the natural places are essential. And I believe that more than ever. And again, it's my hope. Oh, let me go back. It's my hope that this book will kind of make people feel that they can make a difference in that wild places can make a difference in life. And even if the book will make a difference in one life, touches one life, the stories in there, to me, it will have been worth it. And as for Robert, his life ended far too soon, but I hope his legacy lives on. I also want you to know that the canyon serves as a backdrop, in my opinion, to a far more important and meaningful story for me, and that's the journey of parenting, and specifically with my son, my father and son, my relationship with my son, that father and son relationship. My son was struggling through adolescence when I talked him into walking end to end with me, the length of the canyon end to end with me. And, it was a tough several years to help get him through that. And I can honestly say, if it wasn't for the Grand Canyon, he might not be here. And I'm going to go into more detail than that right now. But so I just feel like beyond the stories presented in the book, I do cover other stories of other people besides myself, my son, and Robert Benson. Some are hazardous, some are humorous, and some are educational. But the book's a love story. Bottom line, it's a love story. It's about the love of the land, in this case, the Grand Canyon. Second's love of exploring the place, the region on foot and off trail. And the third's sharing those first two with someone you love. In this case, it was mostly my son, Weston. And this is a picture of he and I when he was, let's see, about 3 years old, hiking out of the Grand Canyon on New Year's Day in 1998. And here he is when we finished in 2016. One thing I say about Weston, I'm really proud of him and where he's at as a young man now. He's actually a doctor, a medical doctor like myself. He's far brighter than me. And he's in a residency of anesthesiology in Salt Lake City. And Weston actually wrote a chapter that I think in the book that I think is the most important and powerful in my eyes, and it's well written. And you'll have to read it to find out what he wrote about. But it's very touching, very moving, very powerful. And just to give you an idea about how good of a writer he is, my co-author from Over the Edge, Death and Grand Canyon, Michael Guillieri, read that chapter as part of an editing process that he did for me. And he said, "Did Weston actually write this?" I said, "Yes, he did." And he said, "Wow, he's a really good writer. You should take some lessons from him." And I probably should, because he's a far better writer than me. He's far smarter than me. I just love him and I'm very proud of him. Anyway, another goal of the book was to honor the Grand Canyon's hiking greats and present a history of walking the canyon's length. So equally highlighted in the book are several who have walked the canyon's entirety, or several, and many who fall into folklore, including this man, Harvey Butchart. Intentionally, my emphasis was not so much on the how and when of their journeys, but the who and the why. You know, their captivating accounts are interwoven between my personal ones and my son. And in doing so, I came to realize how fortunate I've been to have known and even hike with many of those featured. And it's with misty eyes and a sentimental smile that I was able to share memories of these hiking legends, many of whom have long since passed away, including Harvey. All right, let's talk about going the distance, probably what you really want to know. So Grand Canyon, the bureaucratic and geographic boundaries begin at Lee's Ferry, which is below Glen Canyon Dam in northern Arizona, and 277 river miles downstream. It ends at the Grand Wash Cliffs near Pierce Ferry. There are multiple ways in which a person could go walk the entirety of the Grand Canyon. You could do it all on one side, or you do it on the other, or you can do it with a combination. It can be done as a continuous hike or a through hike. Through hike would be where you stay below the rim the entire time. And usually to do something like that, you have to cache food in strategic locations about every 5 to 7 days. But for most hikers, hiking the length will usually take around 2 months. It's been done far faster, but generally and that would be the case whether you do it as a through hike or in segments, collective days and segments. Segments can be done as loops, or you can go in and out side canes and link the segments together like a chain. That's what I did with my son. We did it on both sides of the river. If you do it, it's an honor system, for those who care about it and keep track. And I did for a long time early on, and who had walked end to end. But it's an honor system, if we trust that you did it, and no one's going to try to fact check that, or you can't prove it. As far as how many miles it takes, it's roughly around 2 miles, 2.5 miles on foot for every mile that you can do, for every river mile. So it can be anywhere from about 500, a little less, or 800 or more, depending on which route you choose. It just depends on how much time you have and how much you want to invest in that. One of the things about Grand Canyon that makes it really hard is there is no trail. And like I said, I'm hoping there is no lengthwise trail that ever is built for the reasons I gave. But trails change everything. And here's an example. The Appalachian Trail is probably the most famous in the country for sure. It's 2,200 miles long. It gets nearly 3 million annual hikers and roughly 1,000 through hikers every year. Right now, length of the Grand Canyon hikers, I think the numbers are still below 75 total. But someone recently broke the fastest known time, the FKT, for running the length of the Appalachian Trail. This gal did it in 40 days. So that's averaging 50 miles plus a day, which is mind-boggling. Fantastic athlete, but also mind-boggling. But if you look at the trail, it's a trail. It's just a sidewalk without the cement or concrete. Whereas in Grand Canyon, there is no trail. And you're exposed with lethal drops and exposure. And sometimes you're picking your way along. You might be lucky to make a few miles in an entire day. It's also far different than running the river. A lot of people sometimes compare those two modes of travel. But I got to tell you, having done probably 40 river trips, full or partials, it's like that's the Cadillac way to go. I mean, that's car camping by boat. That's a blast. And hiking, yeah, that's really fun, but it's type 2 fun, meaning that it's really hard when you do it, but it's great looking back. Boating is usually fun when you're doing it and great looking back. But so the path of least resistance would be on the river. The path of most resistance is on foot. I'm just going to read you a little bit I wrote about. Actually, I'm going to skip that because we lost so much time at the beginning. But trust me, it's just very, very hard to do this. Here's a video I hope will play just to show you how difficult this can be. I don't think you're hearing any audio with that, but this is a section below Lava Falls, and you can see this cliff run is really rocky, loose. And then once you get below that, which is not easy, if you fall there, you could get hurt seriously or die. It's not a huge drop. But then you got to negotiate all this jungle of catclaw and mesquite, these thorny plants that love to shred you and seem to block every direction you want to go in certain parts of the canyon. So very, very difficult. There we go. Okay, and don't think you can walk along the river. You know, it's not the beach of Waikiki. I mean, a lot of people think, oh, just follow the river. It's like, nope. You know, this is the river, the section in Marble Canyon where you started off on a little beach and then it quickly devolved into this boulder traverse and, you know, very, very hard. And then sometimes the river will flow wall to wall between the cliffs. And so you end up having to walk most of the time up and away from the river. Often you can get to the river, which is great to get water. You know, that's the most reliable place, of course, but don't plan on walking along the river. Um, yeah, boy. I really can't explain why this is doing this. Um, Here's another image of hiking along a cliff. I'm going to try to see if I can move on. There's another one, huge exposure. And I'm going to talk about Harvey Butchart, who his name is pronounced Butchart. He told me that, but he was the math professor who is the godfather of extreme and remote hiking in Grand Canyon. And he worked at the local college in Flagstaff as a math professor. And he could, besides being a genius at math, he could actually draw two completely symmetrical circles at the same time using his right and left hand. He's fairly renowned for that. He also found that, being a professor at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, which was actually Arizona State College when he got there in 1945, that the Grand Canyon was just up the road, and he was obsessed with the place, like many of us are. He took it another level, and his passion was exploring rim to river routes. And he would buzz up there on every weekend he could get up to the canyon and try to find routes in and out of the canyon. He wasn't really interested in walking the entire length. He was darn close, and he did walk the entire length of Grand Canyon National Park before it was expanded. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But a little more on Harvey. He hiked 12,000 miles over 42 years, and he wrote 1,000 pages of logs about his treks, and he published them as books called Grand Canyon Treks. There's the first one, then there was Treks 2 and Treks 3, a trilogy. This was the 70s into the early 80s. And that's really about most we had as far as literature available for hiking, was Trek's books and a few other hiking guides, but nothing about human history or some of the characters that did some of the early hikes and some of that legacy. Anyway, working at Grand Canyon Clinic for me, I think came with a little bit of perk. Maybe it gave me some street credibility with Harvey. I wrote him and said, hey, I'd love to meet you. I'd love to get to know who you are. And he said, fine. And he came to Grand Canyon Clinic several times and then my house to spend time with me where I would interview him and get to know him. And I really enjoyed that. I wanted to record it while he was still alive, part of the historian in me, because my undergraduate degree in college was history. This is a picture of Harvey at a Grand Canyon Pioneers picnic before it became the Historical Society. He received the first Pioneer Award in 1997. That's me and my wife, Becky. I'm holding Weston as an infant there. And there's our daughters, Brittany and Alexandra, and the other gal, the older lady, to my right is Gail Burek, and she was quite a Canyon character and the second recipient of Grand Canyon's Pioneer Award. Harvey's book or Harvey's biography, all the research I did ended up in a book called The Grand Obsession. And I co-wrote that with Elias Butler, and it won the National Outdoor Book Award. And we're trying to get it back in print as an ebook and a print on demand, and I hope that'll happen. Anyway, we all hike in Harvey's footsteps. We do. And Harvey, this is Harvey in 1958 on a big sand dune pre-dam, and I just love that shot. But he also knew he hiked in the footsteps of other people, and he said we might all be cautious in claiming to be the first people to be the first because Native people have been in the Grand Canyon for at least 4,000 years and seem to have been everywhere, and they do. On my hikes and exploration in Grand Canyon, you come across agave roasting pits and pot shards and flint knapping in places you wouldn't believe. So they did get around everywhere. Did any one indigenous person walk the length end to end? I'm probably guessing no, because it wouldn't have any reason to, and it would take a lot of effort, to try to set of caches or find water and all that. But I think collectively, yes, there was probably a line from end to end where the natives had walked the complete length. To give you an example of what Harvey did, this is one of his maps, and you see these black squiggly lines. Those are all the places he went. Again, he was the first one to walk the length of the national park before it was expanded in 1975. And he did that before Colin Fletcher actually did. Um, oops, I haven't mentioned him yet. So this map doesn't actually show, Harvey's specific line through Grand Canyon, what he did to complete that. And he, like I said, he was the interested in rim to river routes and not going lengthwise. But the guy who actually walked the complete length, was a man named Kenton Grua, and he was a friend of mine, and he passed away tragically in 2002 at the young age of 52. It was a very sad day, and I feature him a lot in the book. For those who don't know Kenton or do know of him, he's famous for being a Grand Canyon boatman and rowing dories down there, and his boat, the Emerald Mile, one that he built. In 1983, he did a speed run trip through the canyon, the fastest trip on by boat in the Grand Canyon to that time, and he was immortalized in Kevin Federico's book, The Emerald Mile, which is a fantastic book. Kevin's just a great writer, and I encourage you to read it if you want to know more about that speed run. And Kenton Grua, here he is. He was raised in rural Utah, and in Salt Lake City, and very conservative. The family moved to Vernal, Utah as a hub of river running for the Yampa and the Green Rivers. And Kenton just fell in love with that lifestyle, and he never went back to his Mormon roots and actually fell into hippie. Um, and the Canyon country and rivers captured his heart and soul, and they held him hostage for the rest of his life, kind of like some of us, including me. But Kenton, I think, was the ultimate, you know, Grand Canyon lover, Grand Canyon addict, and it was just a pleasure to get to know him. I met him on a river trip in 1992. This is him rowing the boat that I hopped into, and it was his. And I asked him. I knew about the speed run and all that, but I really wanted to know about him walking end to end. And I asked him why he did it, and he looked at me and he said, "Have you read the book, The Man Who Walked Through Time?" And I said, "Yeah, I have." And he says, "That's why." So now I'm going to talk about Colin Fletcher. I mentioned him and a little out of sequence there. Sorry about that. But if you haven't read The Man Who Walked Through Time, it's a great book. It's a classic for Grand Canyon. It was printed in 1968. So it's been almost 60 years that it's been in print, and it's sold more books than any other, including Over the Edge, Death in the Canyon. We're getting close, but anyway, Colin Fletcher was born in he was a Welshman. He was born in Wales, 1922. He fought in World War II on the shores of Normandy. He worked for a while as a Kenya, and then he did some farming and surveying in Zimbabwe, and then he was a prospector in Canada, before settling in California in the 1950s. And he walked the length of the state of California in 1958. And he ended up writing a book about it called The Thousand Mile Summer. And he found his true calling was in writing and walking in wild places. He was very successful at it. In 1962, he got the idea to walk the length of Grand Canyon National Park. He actually wanted to walk the entire canyon, but that probably was too daunting for him. He didn't actually say that in his book, but he said he whittled it down to the most impressive part of the park, and that at the time with the geographic boundaries of the park. And that was from Nankoweap Canyon, about 50 miles downstream from Lee's Ferry, to Havasu Canyon at about mile 150, or let's see, what is it? Yeah, around there, 155. Anyway, the middle third of the canyon is what he walked. He wrote a book about it, and you can see at the top of this, maybe you can't read it, but it says the story of the first trip afoot through the depths of Grand Canyon by the author of The Thousand Mile Summer. Thousand Mile Summer is a book he wrote about walking the length of California. But anyway, he wasn't actually the first. It wasn't the first trip, because collectively Harvey Butchart had completed the first trip. He had a section that he needed to do that he hadn't done when he gave all this information to Fletcher to help Fletcher succeed in what he wanted to do to walk the length that Fletcher had found out about Harvey, and then basically took all this information from him and used it, and then wrote a book about it, but then gives himself credit for it being the first. That really bothered Kenton Grua, and it bothered me, and I think it bothered a lot of people. Kenton looked at Harvey Butchart as an idol. Again, that's Harvey with Kenton. That was on the Old Timers River trip in 1994. Now Kenton shared these stories with me. Kenton was a very humble man. He really wasn't a guy that tooted his own horn. As a matter of fact, this is the only time I saw him toot any horn, and or heard him toot a horn. That was this kazoo thingy. We were at Phantom Ranch for New Year's in 1995, and that's me on the right. And anyway, we're both tooting our own horns there. um, so he finished walking the length in 1996, and I'm gonna just go back one if I can. Here's my note on this. He 2 decades after he finished walking the length, the park had expanded the boundaries to the bureaucratic ones matching the geographic ones in 1975. So basically, it did double actually almost triple the length of what the park was. It went from Lee's Ferry to Grand Wash Cliffs now instead of just Nankoweap to Havasu. And in an interview a couple of decades after his achievement, Kenton told the interviewer Lou Steiger that I really don't know why I had it as a goal, other than because of the way I felt about Colin Fletcher doing it. I didn't want him to be able to claim to be the first person to have walked through the Grand Canyon. I didn't care who did per se, but I thought he was a poor choice of a human to have that distinction. So, Kenton wasn't really fond of Colin Fletcher, but it's worth reading The Man Who Walked Through Time. So I want to talk about George Steck. He's another hiking hero. He was a math genius like Harvey Butchart. He had a PhD in probability statistics, and he led the first hike through the canyon, the first through hike where he stayed below the rim. That was in 1992, along with his brother, Alan, and Robert Benson. He wrote books about it, Grand Canyon Loop hikes. I got to meet him at Grand Canyon Clinic as well, and he's a great guy. I really enjoyed getting to know George. He was very opposite of Harvey, who was very serious and um, very determined and driven by hiking as many miles as he could, where George was laid back, like this picture proves. And for him, it wasn't so much making miles as much as making memories. And he was like a father figure to me. I really miss him. He died over 20 years ago, and it was great to be able to tell his story. He was also a father figure to Robert Benson. This is George and his wife Helen with Robert when Robert was heading on his trip, his return trip to Moab, Utah, walking on River Left from Lake Mead all the way back to Moab. Helen was like an adoptive mother to George. Here's George with his brother Alan. Alan was a famous climber. But the two were kind of estranged because they grew up separate because of a broken family. Parents divorced, and Alan was raised by his mother, and George was raised by their dad. So the one they hiked in 1982 was very much a bonding experience for them. And George, like I said, he was a lot of fun. And when you read the book, you'll just appreciate what kind of guy he was. And I revered Harvey, but I really loved George. Now that brings me to talking about, my family and with Weston. That's Weston, the baby backpack, and that was at Phantom, probably 1998. And hiking with him, and there was one of those powerful things I've ever experienced in my life. Took us 7.5 years and 17 legs and about 600 miles of walking. We did it on both sides of the river. I started at age 13. I talked him into it. I said, "Hey, Wes, if you do this, it'd be cool. We could hang out, and you would actually be, if you finish it, you'd probably be the youngest guy to do it. And he knew Kenton Crua, but he said that'd be cool. At 13, he's like most kids, they just wanted to do something exceptional. And I knew for him and me that we would be together, and we'd be a captive audience of two. And I think for Wes, going to adolescence, it was tough. It wasn't like a lot of kids. A lot of us have had that, and so it was a time to just be in the moment with each other and talk and try to bond as a father and a son. And it was spectacular. And for the cool thing about it is Wes still wants to hike with his old man. He still wants to hike with me. And I got to tell you, even in my prime, I was never the hiker that Weston was or is. He's just way exceeds me. Here's an example. This is this is from the Lava Falls down leg. And here he is with his backpack. I wish you could hear this. I don't think you can. But he is going to flip this pack on, which weighs a lot. But he's very strong, and I'm very proud of him. Let's see if I can get this to move on here. Oh, come on. So he still continues to hike. Um, I don't know how many know Rich Rideau. He's a great friend. I think he's next to Harvey Butchart, the Grand Can, the only Grand Canyon explorer that exceeds Rich Rideau is Harvey. But Harvey is a phenomenal hiker, a good guy, and he's on the board for Grand Canyon Conservancy. And I just love the man. And anyway, we've had some great adventures with Rich. Weston also, was part of our hiking, we would pack raft some of the sections we did. You know, he named his pack raft the Emerald Pile. You know, we looked pretty crappy a lot of the times, pretty beat up doing these hikes. So it was a perfect name. If river runners came by, they could get a laugh out of it too. Here's a hike that we did a few years back, and he actually had to carry my pack. I got injured. I fell off a small ledge, and I landed on my chest on Boulder. This is a place where we went. It's spectacular, beautiful, like so many of the places the Grand Canyon are. But I fell on this boulder and I smashed my chest, and it got kind of compressed between my backpack and that boulder. And next to me, believe it or not, was this guy. You know, I couldn't believe it. Fortunately, it did strike at me, but quite scary. And I thought I was pretty seriously injured, but fortunately, it did seem to calm down at first, but then it got worse and worse. And I could hardly even breathe. And I didn't want to be evacuated. I felt like I could still walk, but I just couldn't carry my pack. And it's pretty stubborn about that. I haven't had to be evacuated, and I hope I never will be. But Weston offered to carry it. And here he is carrying my pack, you know. And I swear that pack weighed, you know, at least 30 pounds. But he did that for his old man, and it was really hard. And he's my hero. You can see how far we got to go to get out of there. And I'm really proud of our relationship. I think parenting is front end loaded. You know, if they're for your kids on the if you're there for your kids on the front end, they'll be there for you on the back end. And he sure was there for me on this, and he's always been there for me, and he still is. I'm really proud of that relationship. Here he is with me. I'm going to end with this slide. You know, I think I'd like to quote Charles Schultz about the experiences I have with him, and something I've taught my other kids, my daughters. In life, it's not where you go, it's who you travel with, really, you know, and who you connect with, and sharing places that you love with people you love. And I also want to just say that, you know, the path that you take, or the path that's given to you, it's not always easy. And you shouldn't necessarily seek out the easiest path. That sometimes it's the rocky path, the hardest path that's going to get you to a destination that's going to have you feeling more fulfilled. And I know that's been the case with me, which I convey in the book. And I know it's true with Weston. But sometimes it's on the path that's most rocky that you're going to find your footing most true. But also know it won't always be rocky. It won't.
A lot of people saying they really liked it.
Uh,
Jerry Pascal asks, how often did you have to backtrack?
oh, that's a good question. Not too often. You know, that's probably the most infuriating thing you can do when you hike, is having a backtrack. I mean, you just want to keep going. I think there were times when we were off route. You know, you got sort of cliffed out and stuff, and ended up having to, adjust where you were going. That happened a lot. To backtrack and completely, go out where we started, it didn't happen. So fortunately, there were short, frustrating detours for a little bit, but nothing major.